Place your bets and guess how deep this rabbit hole, or more appropriately, this animal well goes. Hello everyone! 2024 was a fantastic year for video games across all genres, and last year was rich with a wide variety of indie games to note, such as Little Kitty Big City and Another Crab's Treasure. But for some ungodly reason, last year in particular has been one which can be defined by its roster of engaging, vibrant, and incredible Metroidvania games, such as Nine Souls, Bow, Path of the Teal Lotus, and Ultros, to name a few. However, there is one game which has stood out from the pack of great Metroidvania games this year, that being Animal Well, developed by Shared Memory and published by Big Mode. And if that name sounds familiar to you, that's because it's an indie game company started by the great state of Wisconsin's favorite YouTuber, Jason Gastro, aka Video Game Donkey. But of course, a special shout out must be made to the main guy who worked his butt off to make the best possible game he can, that being Billy who reportedly spent 7 years programming, level designing, making odd kangaroo noises, and decorating this game. And let me tell you, that 7 years in development was all worth it. Animal Well is not only a game that is full of wonder, puzzles, and mystery, which keeps gamers engaged in the game's world, but this game is a pure bona fide miracle of Metroidvania gaming that speaks not only to dedicated Metroidvania gamers who are used to the genre's formula, but to the inner child in us, who first got to learn and to love gaming, and we're here to explore why in this short video essay. Before we go any further, it goes without saying, major spoilers for Animal Well. And in the extremely rare chance that Donkey is watching this dinky little critique, let me just say, hey, how you doing, man? Hope you watching this with some gabagool, man. Anyway, let's begin. I have said before, in one way or another, that video game development isn't so much about repeating or stealing old tropes and genres, so much as it's about how to create a game that feels unique, even if it has to borrow influences elsewhere. Sure, a recent Mario and Zelda title, or maybe even a recent first-person shooter, might not feel 100% original when compared to their predecessors, and might be borrowing from one or more influences, but for a younger audience who are just getting into gaming, playing recent games, major AAA or indie titles, can be a gateway into exploring other games in history, and in respective genres. And the gaming genre of Metroidvania, which the term is a combination of the gaming franchise names Metroid and Castlevania, is loaded with such incredible worlds made by various game development teams and companies, and even if these games share similarities with past titles, I like to think gamers can find an aspect or little perk or something else within these games that's unique, which sticks out from other Metroidvania games. Anyway, going back in history for a moment to look at the games which hold part of the namesake of Metroidvania, the original Metroid and Super Metroid on the NES and the SNES respectively are intimidating games to try out at first, and even now they can be overwhelming to revisit if one were to check them out on Nintendo Switch Online. Lord knows when I look at maps detailing Super Metroid, I absolutely shiver at how the game's world goes that deep and far. But one trait that has carried over into other Metroidvania games is that, because of how deep the game's worlds feel when looking at their maps, that these games force the gamer to be curious about the worlds they're engaging in, and perhaps one way of playing these games, or Metroidvanias in general, is not the definitive way to win. In other words, if you're a newcomer to any Metroidvania game, you can't expect to beat up bosses on the spot. No, you have to be an explorer when you come into a Metroidvania cold, observant to the environment, patient, especially when it gets tough with boss fights and you have to get used to the learning curve, and always curious, like a child growing up and learning about the broader world. We live in an era, which I call Metroidvania Mania, where there is a whole sea of Metroidvanias that have their own takes, despite it feeling at first glance like the field of Metroidvania is oversaturated with titles and only a few games stick out. This is especially true when we look years later in the recent case of Team Cherry's Hollow Knight, arguably the greatest and most influential Metroidvania, and that part about its influence is evident by recent Metroidvania titles, which we'll get to in a moment. Other gamers, and perhaps Metroidvania gamers, might get sick of gaming YouTubers, such as myself, bringing this game up again and again as a point of reference, not just as an example of Metroidvania in indie gaming, but considering what came before and after this game, and what is to come next. Eventually, it really does feel that Hollow Knight is, and might continue to be, the genre's high point. What with how fast and diverse the world of Hollow Nest is, the various boss fights, the Christopher Larkin musical score, the Pantheon fights, the game's themes including free will and morality, and of course this game introducing to the gaming world the GOAT of all video game characters. Hollow Knight arguably represents the peak of Metroidvania gaming, which is good for Team Cherry and the history of Metroidvania. However, this does come with the side effect of putting pressure on other game developers. Playing Metroidvania games in a post-Hollow Knight world means that developers have to find ways to think about how gamers will stay engaged with their own games, and finding something that will make them revisit them and replay. This is where we turn to some of this year's releases in the Metroidvania genre. Take Squid Shock's Bow, Path of the Teal Lotus, which puts you in the shoes of a fox protagonist who is equipped with a bow, or staff, and as mentioned in this essay's introduction, is inspired by Japanese culture and history. Bow might turn off some gamers due to his heavy focus on platforming, especially when it is necessary to get good at for boss fights, but I kinda dig how it makes the gamer become disciplined in getting to know when exactly to double jump or dash. I even say some of this game's platforming is breezy easy, like smooth sailing in the sky once you're good at it. Turning to another notable example, some gamers and critics on YouTube and gaming journalism outlets have declared Red Candle Studios' Nine Souls to be one of the greatest Metroidvania games in the genre's history, not just for its focus on parry combat, which needs to be timed correctly when fighting certain enemies and bosses, but for the game's complex and intriguing story, rich cast of characters, its soundtrack, and how the game utilizes comic book storytelling in such a fantastic way. In Nine Souls, players play the protagonist Yi, taking the name of an ancient Chinese mythological figure, as he takes on the titular 9 souls spread across the cyberpunk-inspired world of New Kunlun, and who is also a cat. Boy, bugs, cats, and foxes? Oh my, what is it with recent Metroidvanias and animals? Hint, hint, hint for later. Unlike other games in the genre, the game's story is noted for being incredibly complex, and especially like Hollow Knight, forces the gamer to make moral decisions, despite lacking some of the political flair that is seen in other games made by Red Candle Studios. Side note, I'm not well versed in the political conflict between China and Taiwan, nor do I claim to be an expert on foreign affairs and policy, but I do believe in the freedom of indie gaming studios and developers to tell the stories they want to tell, and to make the games they hope gamers will play. Regardless of the politics, it's not hard to see why, to quote the words of the god gamer himself, Mr. Fireborn, here on YouTube, Nine Souls is a masterpiece. However, as much as I enjoy playing Metroidvanias like Nine Souls and Bow, it's not hard to look at these games and think of how they, along with the development teams behind them, have to come up with unique ways to differentiate themselves from a certain and perhaps obvious influence in the same genre, and yet still feel like they can't escape the comparison. Case in point, the way they employ non-linear gameplay, in that there is not one path a gamer could take to finish the game, the 2D animation, as well as how Bow and Nine Souls utilize a system of power-ups which resemble Hollow Knight's charms. For Bow, the game lets the player use Onamori. For Nine Souls, players choose gems. However, while Nine Souls is not entirely like Hollow Knight or maybe other games, this all goes back to the worry some gamers might have that the genre is at risk of going stale. And a game which could only hope to exceed the high marks of its predecessors would need to have a fancy twist on the genre to spice things up. Which brings us right back to the Metroidvania of today's video essay, Animal Well. Animal Well is a game which employs 8-bit graphics for a modern gaming audience in contrast to the 2D animated graphics of some recent Metroidvania games, which to me is an appropriate aesthetic choice since the game doesn't really have a story explaining the background or the setting or even the various animals you'll come across, nor does it attempt to be lore heavy, more on the supposed lore later. Instead, the game's opening scene greets you to the main objective of this game: collect the 4 flames to progress to the game's finale. Put an asterisk on the word finale, and our protagonist is born out of a flower and jumps into action, letting the player head straight through the well, so to speak, of playing through hours and hours of this game. At first glance, Animal Well shares a lot of gameplay qualities with the aforementioned Metroidvania games released this year, what with having a map outlining the well looking appropriate for a Metroidvania game, despite each room filling up the whole screen, unlike in 2D Metroidvanias where the camera follows the player through a room, an inventory that is necessary to progress through the game, and like other Metroidvanias, is a non-linear game which can be beaten in any way. And there is no set order as to how to obtain each item to fill your inventory, and a musical score that is memorable like the game's 9 Souls and especially Hollow Knight. Except in the case of Animal Well's score, it evokes the feel of Angelo Badalamenti's score for Twin Peaks that ranges from eerie and foreboding to melancholic. So overall, one could easily say it's just another Metroidvania game. However, unlike the aforementioned games, the little itty-bitty protagonist doesn't have attack skills or health power-ups to boost up those measly 4 hearts, with the exception of certain health fruits lying around which give you blue hearts and yellow hearts which permanently increase your health capacity, but requires the use of a hack. The clue is in this room. During my second run through this game, I found this hack to be unnecessary. Also, our character can't directly attack enemy animals or the bosses, not even to jump on top of them like other platformers. Sure, you can throw firecrackers to scare off the giant moaning kangaroo, or to make the ghost disappear, temporarily, until you light the candles with matches. But perhaps the obvious tell is how small our protagonist is, and thus this vulnerability makes the gamer feel insignificant and tiny when compared to all the other animals dwelling in this well. It's a world, or well in this case, that feels like a zoo, with each area having appropriately placed bosses guarding the 4 flames. And indeed, this game is filled with a variety of animals who lurk or reside in the well. Some are friendly, like the big chinchilladas, who seem to like you and can help you reach hard areas when you don't have a packed inventory, and can also crush you, which is an achievement in this game, aka the so-called good ending. See also the penguins. Other birds like this one who tries to stop you from using inventory items like the bubble wand to get through hard to reach areas. Hedgehogs, which remind me of Braid, since that game along with Animal Well is heavy on puzzles. And thankfully, the bunnies in this game don't screech like cats or have sharp teeth. In fact, these hedgehogs are needed to sacrifice in order to beat a lizard boss that doesn't require much thought so much as timing, when you consider that long, quick, retracting tongue. The well also has dogs which will try to rip you up like a toy, though thankfully they can get distracted by your frisbee disc, bouncy ball, or even your dreidel top. Though do be careful, at least one of these dogs, like one of the bosses, won't be easily fooled and will squeeze in tight places. And it's got foxes and cats. Foxes and cats, I wonder if I've seen those before in other recent Metroidvanias. And it even has horror-inspired beings like croaking crows and this big giant bat. In fact, the game's creator Billy Basso has stated that the game is also survival horror, specifically pointing to how the crows in rooms like this were inspired by Resident Evil. So, if this place is an animal well where the animals dwell, then what does that make the playable character? Well, Billy Basso is quoted as saying that the playable character is, and note that these are his words, not making this up, a Mexican jumping bean. Yeah, so I went searching for what a Mexican bean looks like, and I can sort of see the resemblance. This little factoid was weird for me to read up on, and maybe for you while playing the game, as this little bean appears to be one of, if not the most vulnerable beings down in the fictional well, until you realize after thinking about it for a second that this little bean represents new life breathing into the world, just like the 65 eggs spread across the well, with almost all of them collected in the end, kept in their their shell before they can hatch and bring new life. Beans bring life, so to speak, to the food we eat, or to coffee in the form of coffee, like the cold brewed black coffee I'm drinking right now while writing this script. That was a pretty poor meta joke anyway. And it's only fitting to remind viewers that despite how vast, deep, wondrous, and sometimes dangerous the world of Animal Well is, the itty-bitty little jumping bean you play can't actually fight any enemy animals or bosses. Oh, there are technically bosses for you to deal with, and there are ways to make them go away or to kill them, such as the lizard trying to lick you up and the final lizard showdown involving him licking 6 hedgehogs for him to flee, the giant ostrich stomping around and trying to peck you with its beak as you're trying to burrow yourself in tight corners and making the ostrich boss drown while it's following you stampede style in its wheel. And most annoyingly, the white ghost dog, or I thought that was a cat, but it's actually a dog, who follows you and tries to hurt you until you die. That is, until you reach a room in the top right of this world and place a mock disc there, effectively letting this spirit rest, unless you pick up the mock disc again for another bunny. These aren't traditional boss fights you would expect from any other Metroidvania game, because your first instinct in a Metroidvania game is to fight your way to defeating them, like Seamus shooting aliens, or especially the Knight in Hollow Knight using their nail or soul power to defeat the game's fantastic roster of bosses. Instead, as with the rest of this dense well, these confrontations are their own form of puzzles, as they require you to use your brain to defeat them. Find the right space between you and the moving hedgehogs and the lizard won't lick you up. Know the right path and where to hide to ensure the big-necked ostrich won't poke you. Stand in the appropriate location so you know where the seahorse will blow bubbles. This leads to yet another reason, and perhaps the biggest reason why Animal Well is so distinct from other Metroidvania games. Animal Well truly transcends the Metroidvania genre, to the point where one has to question whether it can even be considered a Metroidvania game at all. 1 minute gameplay feels like typical Metroidvania Mania, but in another it's a puzzle game, and another it's a platformer, with 1, 2, maybe 3 ways to navigate in one room or another. Writing this script after replaying the game, I was thinking of an article which was written on Polygon with a not very clickbaity title, Animal Well tricked you into thinking it's a Metroidvania. Well, it is, but okay. In this article, the author writes, quote, "What Animal Well really is a collection of puzzles. Puzzles upon puzzles. Puzzles that are very apparent and puzzles that you can walk by dozens of times and not even realize they are present. Its items are puzzles, and using them allows you to try your hand at even more elaborate puzzles. It challenges you to understand the world in front of you, and then it complicates that understanding." End of quote. If there's a critique to be made about these bosses, is that apart from maybe the 2 Mandicores and the fake and true endings of Animal Well, these confrontations aren't exactly memorable if you're heavy on parry combat when compared to more recent Metroidvanias, especially Hollow Knight, which has one of the richest varied roster of bosses in gaming history. The nice thing about playing and replaying Metroidvanias like Nine Souls and especially Hollow Knight is that you can watch and replay previous boss fights and see what you did wrong with certain bosses, and whether or not one way to beat them is working. And this lack of a boss replayability in Animal Well would be a negative that would drag the game's quality down, were it not for the fact that this is, thematically speaking, the right choice for Billy Basso to go with, which leads us to talking about how Animal Well is a game about curiosity. Touching on the lore for a moment, if there even is any lore. I have no intention of making this video essay heavy on the lore within the well of Animal Well, because other YouTubers such as NoCaps and Fury Forge have attempted to explain the game's lore with greater lucidity than I ever could. But while it's worthwhile to explore and contemplate on, I don't think Animal Well was intended to be a lore-focused game, despite the game's ending leaving some unanswered questions. Rather, it's a gameplay-focused and puzzle-oriented one, without concrete explanations which can be called canon. Most game theories regarding Animal Well, or for that matter, any other game that doesn't have a thorough explanation for what is happening, are just speculating and filling in the gaps as to what is happening. Yet, despite this, the biggest compliment you can say about Animal Well, and one which makes the game stick out from the rest of the Metroidvania crowd last year, is how the game feels like it was made as a loving tribute to the joy of gaming and the gamer in all of us, and, as said last chapter, force us to take a step back, to be curious about the game's world, to not act on impulse, and to think about how to navigate one area or another. And this is why I would call Animal Well pure child's play. And all one needs to do is to look at the various influences in gaming history that inspired Billy Basso to create the world of Animal Well, from early Super Mario Bros. Video games which rely on linear gameplay, to more recent titles like Fez, Tunic, and The Witness. Indie games which allow some form of freedom for the gamer to go back to one area if they're stuck and come back when needed. Pointing to one instance where curiosity matters for beating this game, when exploring the game's world, you will begin to notice how the game utilizes Easter eggs as a signature of Metroidvania gaming, and also in the literal sense. First, the 65 eggs to be found and collected before you can attempt the true ending of Animal Well. Some eggs are pretty hard to miss, like the one to your left after you wake up from the blossoming flower at the game's start. However, most of the eggs' locations require you to look twice in certain rooms, like if some weeds on top of a room look kinda funny, or if there's something up with one funny looking tile on a wall. Sure, the eggs might be the Animal Well universe equivalent of collecting grubs in Hollow Knight, but whereas every grub looks the same, in Animal Well each egg is designed with incredible detail, despite the small amount of pixels it takes to create each one. Case in point, I know when I try to make an egg design on my own, even I can't keep up with how Billy Basso was pretty careful to make every egg distinct in their own way. This egg I made on the spot was inspired by the prismatic shards in Stardew Valley. Animal Well has other Easter eggs for the gamer to find, and well, you can't celebrate Easter without an Easter bunny, and this game has 16 of them. Oh, there's more bunnies in this game? I wonder if that's gonna come up later. However, while the rabbit hunting is a neat feature in this game, sometimes it reaches the point of being tedious. Case in point, the bunny mural, which you might walk past earlier in the game and then go back to change once you're at a certain point. The first time putting the new bunny mural together was easy, but the second time around, I was off by about a few pixels when it finally came to figuring out where to put the big blue bunny's tail. Or is that a flower coming out of its behind? Or is it behind a flower? Whatever. If you are curious enough to fetch for some other hidden Easter eggs besides the 65 actual eggs in this game, you could turn your protagonist into Gomez from Fez and the Link-inspired Fox from Tunic. Curiously, one recent game which you can see echoes of in Animal Well is The Witness, which was designed by Jonathan Blow, which is not only shown by how Animal Well is heavy on puzzles in order to advance, but it's also funny because...
Alright. I can't do this anymore for now.
But when you compare and contrast each of these games, you can see how some of the puzzles in some rooms are similar to how The Witness makes you use the thinking part of your brain, even if The Witness does get repetitive. However, the biggest reason why Animal Well is a game about curiosity, and if you really want to know how and why Animal Well is so addicting and replayable, besides the various ways of speedrunning and trying out challenges, is just one button away on your keyboard or controller. All you really need to do is to take one good look at your inventory when you have collected all of your items and just take a gander. It's literally a toy collection, from how unique and colorful each object is designed to how, once again, your own inventory menu can sound like another song. In your inventory, you have firecrackers, which you can pick up right at the start of the game to deal with the floating blue ghost where you can't light the night candles yet, and which you can increase how many you carry from 3 to 6 once you get the pack after the first ending. A red disc, which, when thrown, acts as a frisbee, which it is, making traveling across certain areas easier, especially once you figure out how to frisbee jump by jumping while running and then immediately hitting the item button, and thus areas such as the water where the swordfish resides or the secret spike room above it where a hidden bunny resides gets less difficult to navigate. And, like with other items, can be used to distract those pesky barking dogs. A slinky that can help you push buttons and unlock doors, and which otters go crazy over, as well as a green yo-yo which can reach buttons in hard areas, a remote control that can switch on or off some platforms and can make one hungry snake obey, a bouncy red ball which, while mostly out of control when released, is useful for removing blocks in certain areas, that is, unless it inadvertently leaves the room without you catching it first. A top, or as I call it, a dreidel top that helps to get to lower levels and hidden areas to help deal with a bunch more Mishikats in this world. a yellow flute shaped like one of those recorders you get in music class in 3rd grade, at least that was the case for me, and that can help you unlock more secrets and teleport you if you are in a hurry. Although, to this day, I am still trying to find ways to play songs from The Legend of Zelda on it during free play. And, of course, the game's signature item, at least in my humble opinion, the Bubble Wand. Recent Metroidvanias have come up with unique ways to incorporate platforming into their worlds for players to challenge their skills, especially, for example, in the case of Hollow Knight, where the knight finds themselves in areas such as the White Palace and its adjacent Path of Pain, and gamers have to know when it's appropriate to pogo jump with their nail, when to double jump, and when to dash. Unfortunately, our itty bitty bean in Animal Well can either double jump or dash to make accessing harder to reach areas easier. But with the Bubble Wand, there's a lot of cool ways to navigate around the well, especially once you have the wand upgraded after the first ending. Side note, during my second playthrough, I realized that gamers can come across chests to acquire items for your inventory and eggs, but in the same room where you get the Bubble Wand upgrade, there's an additional chest which you can try to open, but only if you haven't died during your run. Hence, the skulls blocking it count how many times the player has died through their save run. As an additional bonus, if you're feeling greedy and want to really get deep into the world of Animal Well, and I mean deeper than the actual map will tell you, there is an additional item which has you using certain items and needs exact timing for you to earn it. Hence, it helps to get the timer from the pedometer in this hallway. This item is called the Cheater's Ring, and man, let me tell you, for such an extra little treat for further exploration around the well, this was an absolute pain to achieve, as just like trying to succeed getting the Spike Bunny, getting the Cheater's Ring took me a few hours, if not days. Nevertheless, I didn't have much use for the ring since I already know my way around. Not that I'm afraid of breaking my game if I abuse it, which is possible if you're a little too curious and want to see if there are more bunnies. If I have to make one criticism of the inventory after playing the game twice, I initially didn't have much use for the retractable wheel you get after you free the cats, despite it being necessary to get some eggs in the game, and of course the Cheater's Ring, and it's not helpful when you're trying to get a certain bunny near a certain spike area and you find the Frisbee and Bubble Wand more useful. I guess this nitpick boils down to not having much fun with the wheel when compared to the game's other items. Still though, to emphasize once again, in Animal Well, you're not just using these items to go through difficult areas, you're literally playing with toys, flinging them around to see which one fits and which one doesn't. This feature puts Animal Well far ahead of the curve in terms of modern Metroidvania gaming. However, despite having attempted to make a positive case for playing and replaying this game, not everyone seemed to be pleased with Animal Well. Well, at least some who should know better. So, I didn't want to end this video on a downer, but sorry for another tangent. I just had to address this one nasty fella on this site whose commentary on this game, and for that matter, his attitude online, has grinded my gears for years. That person being Phil Burnell, aka Darkside Phil or DSP Gaming. Now, I'm not going to get into his entire internet history since at this point it's beating a small horse and I don't want to turn this rather positive game critique into a full-on YouTube drama fest, since this little tangent has a point about when it's appropriate to make criticism of art and entertainment. But the inspiration for this video essay praising Animal Well, ironically, was seeing Phil being absolutely dismissive towards this game, and how he saw it as no different than any other Metroidvania game out there. Here's a quick sample.
So we're going to start here with Animal Well. It's critically acclaimed. People really love it. Now, I haven't seen anything about it. So, okay, let's be honest here. All right? It's a Metroidvania. There's been 5 zillion of these. Developers realize that these are a lot easier to develop than games with more complex graphics. So I hate to say it, it doesn't seem very original to me. It seems like something that you probably have seen a million times before. I've seen a million of these already. So this is 100% because of Video Game Donkey, right? And I'll be honest with you, I'm glad now that I did not actually check this out, because people were trying to push me to check it out. And honestly, I don't think it would have worked. Like, I think I would have liked it for like the first hour, and then I kind of would have been a little bored. And the audience, I guarantee you this would not have worked for my audience. It's so rare when a Metroidvania even works for my audience, you know? But hey, more power to them. If people like the game and it's a solid game for people who like this style of game or whatever, good.
And yes, I had the displeasure of sitting through this video quite a few times just so I couldn't misrepresent what he was saying. Naysayers will always be there, and negativity should be an expectation for artists and creators when they put out art for others to explore, play around, and examine closely, and this is especially true when a new game comes out. However, watching Darkside Phil's thoughts on Animal Well solely on a trailer, and being dismissive of the game, even when he hasn't played it yet, was one of the most disrespectful acts I have ever seen from another gaming YouTuber towards an indie game developer. What's worse is that this forced me to look into the mirror and do my own self-reflection and contemplate on how and why this one meaningless rant about a game this person has little interest in stuck with me like a piece of the nastiest gum on the sole of my shoe which won't come off. YouTubers as media critics and or as fans of any medium often get a bad reputation due to the algorithmic model of content creation, which forces users to pump out content to boost their visibility on this site, as opposed to the quality of the channel's videos. Unlike video games journalists, who have to work with deadlines and have to be literate on the medium of games, it's easy for people to come onto YouTube with little to no background on any particular topic and post a screeching or ignorant rant and hope people watch. Seeking negativity as the default mode of criticism towards art and entertainment in literature, films, music, and, in this case, video games, has always been guaranteed to generate attention and views, and this makes it difficult to seek nuanced and informed critique of media when dealing with a cesspool of ignorance, callousness, and sometimes racism and bigotry. One notable exception on YouTube being video essayists, whom, while writing on entertainment in literature, film, music, and video games, the medium involves having to research for weeks, months, maybe years, and this means having a grasp on the craft of writing and combine the medium of writing with being able to edit together these thoughts into a coherent video. That doesn't mean one should hold back from any potential criticism of a game if they feel the need to address it, but that this criticism should be thought out, rather than involving talking before thinking. This is why it's so important to elevate more thoughtful, balanced, and mindful essayists and YouTubers who are curious about the ways media informs us about our past and how it affects us now, and not the ill-informed, politically illiterate clickbait drama mill fest of this hell site. So, suffice to say, while I am honest enough to admit I don't expect too much from YouTubers like Darkside Phil whenever I have the unfortunate rare chance to see what this, individual has to say, I do my best to hope for the best in people, and that they grow as video producers and as people. But let's take Phil's main complaint about Animal Well being just another unremarkable Metroidvania, and apply that label to another great Metroidvania released in 2024 like Nine Souls. I may be willing to put Animal Well over Nine Souls on a top 2024 Metroidvania list mainly because of how much pleasure I get out of playing Animal Well, and I don't have to think too much about story, which admittedly is a purely subjective opinion. I can see a future, maybe in a decade or two, where Nine Souls is viewed as more influential and more impactful than Animal Well. However, if I were to say Nine Souls is just another Metroidvania like Hollow Knight, and ignore how the developers took Chinese culture and history into consideration when creating this world, I would look foolish. I mean, is Nine Souls automatically not worth playing because it just so happens to have some similarities between itself and Hollow Knight? Just replace Metroidvania with sports game, and Darkside Phil's complaints could apply to each version of EA Sports Madden, NHL, MLB The Show, or NBA 2K games. However much those games feel less like unique gaming experiences, and more like expensive reskins. For Pete's sake, Phil being experienced with fighting games to little to no degree of skill, you can say the same thing about any recent Tekken or Mortal Kombat game, regardless of each game's overall quality. Honestly, in the future, just have some modesty, man, or maybe know when not to babble on the internet. As a dedicated Metroidvania gamer myself, I, like many of you in the audience, have high hopes for the genre's future, and playing and replaying Animal Well while finishing this critique has helped to confirm my opinion that this game is arguably 2024's Game of the Year, or at least in the conversation for the title, as well as being one of the best Metroidvanias of all time. Hopefully, this video essay has reaffirmed your opinion of the game, and or given you slightly more insight into the game's world, gameplay, and Metroidvania history. And if you haven't played yet, Well, my hope is that this short video essay convinces you to give this unforgettable gaming experience a try, either on Steam, the PlayStation, or Nintendo Switch. And if you played this game and enjoyed playing it after watching, that this brief critique gave you some slight entertainment and or helped to articulate how and why Animal Well is such an incredible gaming experience. Let me know in the comments section what you thought of this game, and thank you for watching. Yes, finally I got a short breather from working on the massive Forever Freddy project, which just premiered its first episode in the beginning of November on this channel. Still can't believe that video essay was nearly 3 hours. As far as episodes 2 and 3 are concerned for FNAF 2 and FNAF 3, they're coming along just fine. In fact, the script for the FNAF 2 episode is turning out to be another massive endeavor, and there's a lot of research which needs to be done besides playing the game and replaying it, for footage, voiceover recording to be done, and edits and whatnot. But for now, I'm glad I was able to knock this short video essay out of the park and have at least one shorter video essay for the latter half of 2024. And maybe I will squeeze in another one come before New Year's Eve or after, maybe 2 more shorter essays. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video essay on Animal Well, please like, comment, and share elsewhere. And if you enjoy what I do, please consider subscribing to the Armchair Brain YouTube channel to stay up to date on future video essays. And if you would like to support the channel further and help fund future work into video essay projects like my ongoing Zelda video essays and my Forever Freddy miniseries, please consider becoming a Patreon by clicking the web link below in the description. Thanks again, have yourself a nice day, and enjoy the rest of your year.